Attention everybody, the views and opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, or any of its subordinate and subsidiary ministries. Please use discretion while viewing this with your children, as some of the content may not be suitable.
You ready? Yeah, ready. All right, thank you very much. We're Paul and Nancy Collins. It is the Bucket List. This is the third edition of this show, Nancy. Time flies when you're having fun, right?
I know, that's right.
And we're being engineered today by Jason Cobb in the absence of Matthew Pearson, and we appreciate Jason's efforts. If I sound like I have something in my mouth, it's because I have something in my mouth. I have a throat lozenge. I've been having some throat issues, and so hopefully this will get me through the show. The bucket list, let me tell you about it. The bucket list is not entertainment. The bucket list is information. And it's not for everybody, but it ought to be. Because whatever your age, if you live long enough and the world lasts, you will reach retirement time. And of course, somebody in your family or in your circle of friends is either retired or approaching retirement. And of course, we need to remember that in the United States of America, the older population is a very, very large part of our population. It's a large part of it. And much of the assets of the United States of America are held by people who are past 50 years of age. So even though this is not entertainment, this is vital information, and I believe it is vital. I wish someone had told me all this stuff 50 years ago. I would have been probably a multimillionaire today, to tell you the truth. But I didn't know it then, but I know it now. Anyway, Nancy, our first show, we just gave an introduction to all the kind of stuff that we'd be dealing with in future shows. Our second show, which was last week, we dealt with the federal income tax. We didn't get to finish that, so we're going to work on a little bit more today to try to get a little further along. But I want to remind folks that if you have questions that we haven't answered, feel free to go to the Acts Media Group website. Now, Acts is spelled A-C-T-S, ActsMediaGroup.com, and these shows will be archived there. But also, you'll find ways to contact us. Acts Media Group will see that I receive the information, and I'll be able to communicate with you via email, etc., to help you with questions and direct you to some sources where you'll find the answers that you need concerning many things that in your bucket list. Now, what is the bucket list? Well, that means things that are at the bottom of the bucket. Most people, when it comes to life, they're skimming off the top. Right now, there's a big concern because there's a shortage of restaurant workers. Because during the pandemic, restaurants were closed and closing and shut down, etc. Many people went on unemployment. Now, unemployment is paying so good that there are folks who won't go back to work until they use up all their unemployment benefits. So the restaurant industry is hurting for workers. Now, I was telling you on the way here today, Nancy, that restaurants actually exist because they cater to people's desire for pleasure, good food and fellowship and so forth. I can remember when restaurants hardly existed. People ate at home or they didn't eat. And in fact, we didn't have hot lunch programs at school. Everybody carried a lunch. We called it packed a lunch. And so I'm a throwback to the age of dinosaurs, and I realize that, but some things are like dirt. It just doesn't change a whole lot. Dirt's still dirt. So here we are with a new situation on our hands, people skimming off the top, more concerned about whether or not their restaurant's going to be able to seat them than their future 10 years down the road, or 20 or 30 or 5, whatever. The bucket list, at the bottom of the bucket, are things like retirement, Social Security, income tax. And there are many other things at the bottom of the list, too. Nursing homes, in-home care.
I know, but there's a lot of people that want to take really, really, really nice trips
Oh, yeah.
on their own time after they retire.
Right.
And that's also on a bucket list.
That's right. But to get to that part of the bucket, they have to have some finances. You don't go on cruises simply because somebody, the cruise ship owner says, we want you to go on the cruise.
No, but you're talking about how restaurants need workers, and their workers are living off of the
Unemployment.
unemployment benefits. It would be nice if they put the unemployment benefits in the bank and went ahead and went back to work.
Well,
Is that how that works?
no, you can't work and draw unemployment at the same
Okay,
time.
but then what about, oh, thank you, Jesus. So that means that by the time they go back to work, they may not have a job because somebody else took their job. So that's their fault. That's not
That-
anybody else's.
You got it. So, the world is not fair. Nobody ever expected it to be fair after the Garden of Eden. Nothing's fair. So we have to learn how to live within the structure of the society and the community in which we find ourselves. Now, frankly, folks, because this is an internet show, and I know, and Nancy knows, we have the potential of reaching the entire world, which means billions of people. What we're talking about is really relevant to people in the United States of America. The 48 contiguous states, the lower 48, plus Hawaii and Alaska, and then, of course, people in some of the territories like Puerto Rico. But people in other nations can learn something about the United States by staying tuned to the bucket list. Now, let's get back to this thing about income tax. Nancy, as I've said so many times to so many people, and on this show, or over this medium at least, I remember World War II very well. I grew up during World War II. And one of the last things on our mind was tax rates. People weren't thinking about it. But the fact of the matter is there were some things that were going on that need to be pointed out that we could get back to another time, because history has a way of repeating itself. During World War II, no civilian vehicles were built, no new cars. They all went to the military.
So that means that they weren't building pleasure vehicles, you might say, everyday vehicles. They were building all military.
All military. All of the Cadillac engines went in tanks. They didn't go in Cadillac cars. And all of anything that was green dye, was used in the military. In fact, one of my favorite illustrations were a brand of cigarettes called Lucky Strike, and they had a green package with a red target on them. And then they went to a white package with a red target, and their advertising slogan was, Lucky Strike Green has gone to war. You didn't buy anything green on the civilian side. There was a lot of rationing. Back then, we didn't have, margarine was kind of invented as a result of the war, but people depended on lard. It was rationed. Sugar was rationed because, after all, most of the sugar was coming from areas that made it difficult. See, things were transported by ship, and the oceans were full of submarines, sinking ships. Everything was rationed, basically, everything. Gasoline, tires, etc. So we knew what shortages were. We knew what it was to stand in line. We knew what that was. You had a little book of stamps called ration stamps. And when you used up all of your stamps, then even if something was available to purchase, you couldn't buy it without stamps. And but about income tax. Income tax, folks, in those days, the corporate income tax went to 90%. That's 90%. And in spite of it, American industry that had converted from building civilian things like cars and tractors and other matters, overnight became a war-footed industry. I mean, they switched from building cars to building tanks and building civilian airplanes to building military airplanes. Overnight, American industry rose to the challenge and started building all these war materials, artillery pieces, everything. And they had to, because when the war first began, American soldiers, and we had a very small standing army, very small, one of the smallest in the world. They were marching in training with wooden rifles. Didn't even have real rifles. So overnight, our industry, instead of churning out civilian goods, was turning out military material, and we raised an army, equipped an army, etc., but it cost money. And these corporations that were really good at producing wartime material, they took it on the chin, 90% corporate tax. Think about it. So let's look now at a little bit more about the income tax, because today would be past time to file your personal income tax, except everyone was given an extension automatically because of the pandemic. But nonetheless, it's just around the corner when it will be time for you to file your income tax. Now, I'm going to give you a suggestion, and some people have taken this seriously and some have not. It is better to file early than to file just on time,
That's right.
because the IRS computers get overwhelmed, and if you have filed and you're sliding it under the door at the last minute to get it postmarked in time, guess what? By then, those old IRS computers may already be cranking out late notices, and with late notices comes penalty and interest. So don't wait until the last minute to just before midnight get a stamp on your mail. Do your tax. Do it now. And then when those who have nonprofits, and there's some of you out there listening to me who have nonprofits or you participate with nonprofits. I've tried to tell nonprofits for years and years and years. Ordinarily, your filing is due, your report with the IRS, by May 15. Don't wait until midnight on May the 14th, or you will probably get a late notice. I've dealt with the woman who's the head of that division in Salt Lake City on the phone, and she told me herself that their computers were antiquated and they could not get them reprogrammed with the new data entry and all that's required, so that what happens is those old computers, if your report isn't there well in advance of the deadline, those old computers are already kicking out automatically late notices. And it's very difficult to prove that you were on time unless, and you can prove it. Now here's what we do. Whether it's our personal income tax or two nonprofits that we represent, whatever we send to the United States government, to the Internal Revenue Service, or to the Department of Revenue of the state of Missouri, we always send it with a return receipt requested. So we have proof that they received it, because they have to sign a receipt saying they received it, and that's mailed back to us, and we keep those. And they always have stood us in good stead, and I suggest you do that. If you have questions about any of this, contact us through the Axe Media Group website and let us know what your questions are, and I'll answer you this way. I'll either say yes, no, or I'll give you a definite maybe, or see, it's still a happy hour, or I will refer you to a reliable source or resource, and you can get the answers that you need. These are important matters. So again, this is not an entertainment show. This is an information show. And it's based on our personal research, our personal experience, and we've had some experience. It's no secret. In June, I'll be 86. Next September, Nancy will be 76. We've lived a while. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two, as that insurance commercial goes. And we're willing to share with you. The Internal Revenue Service. The history of taxation in America is fascinating. I recommend you go online and just type in history of U.S. income tax. You'll be amazed at what you find. It's very interesting. It goes all the way back to the colonial days when they had tariffs, and eventually you get to the formalization of the income tax in 1913 and so forth. So anyway, look it up and you will be glad you did. You can also find, in addition to the history of the income tax, you can find all kinds of information about tax brackets. By tax brackets, we mean if you have an income of a certain amount, you're in a certain percentage that you pay for income tax. So here's how the brackets work. In the American tax system, income taxes are graduated, so you pay different rates on different amounts of taxable income, called tax brackets. The more you make, the more you pay. For example, a single taxpayer will take 10%. Now this is a single person, non-married. A single taxpayer will pay 10% on taxable income up to $9,875 earned in 2020. The top rate is 37% for taxable income above $518,400 for tax year 2020. Don't you wish you had that problem? Some of you do. There are 7 tax brackets in all. There used to be many more, and during the Trump administration, they reduced the number of tax brackets. The Internal Revenue Service increases those brackets from year to year to account for inflation and reduce what they call bracket creep, when taxpayers get pushed into higher tax brackets, not because they earn more money, but because of rising inflation. Now, inflation is a very real thing. I challenge you, look at what some item in the supermarket costs you today compared to last year and the year before. I can tell you, we keep track of our grocery bill, I call it, whatever we buy in the supermarket. And ours has increased significantly over the last 2 or 3 years and continues to go up. Some of the items that we used to pay small amounts for, we now pay larger amounts for. About everything has increased in price. It's called inflation, where prices become inflated, they get bigger. Now, in tax year 2020, for example, a single person, that's an unmarried person, with taxable income up to $9,875 paid 10%, while in 2021, that income bracket rises to $9,950. They give you more room because it costs you more to live. Well, I can assure you that the difference between $9,875 and $9,950 does not cover the cost of the rising cost of living. Cost of living is more than that. But I'll give you all these figures. If you go to the website, axmediagroup.com, I'll share all this with you. I'll take the time, sit in front of my computer in my writing room, and I'll use my keyboard, and I will write to you an email, give you all this kind of information. I'll make it so that you can even call me if you want to. I want to help you. That's what we're here for, because Acts Ministry exists to serve where needed by doing the right thing. We are doing this to serve your needs because it's the right thing to do. Okay, similarly, other brackets for income earned in 2021 have been adjusted upward as well. So in other words, you could earn a little more money before you had to pay tax to help make up for the rising cost of living. Here are the tax brackets for income earned in 2021. Now, what you're going to earn this year, here are the tax brackets. We'll start with the small one. 10% for incomes up to $9,950. This is for single people right there. For married couples like us, $19,900. So 10% above whatever you make above that. So if we made $25,000, then we would pay the difference between $25,000 and $19,900. We'd pay 10% of that
Oh, okay.
for tax. Now, 12% for incomes over $9,950 is for married couples filing jointly. And then we go to 22% for incomes over $40,525 for a single person, or $81,050 for married couples filing jointly. And listen to me, folks, there's a lot of retired people who have incomes as a couple of over $81,000. They do, because they have their retirement income, they have investments, they may have rental properties, whatever. But it's not unusual to find that married couples who are retired having that kind of income. Now, if you're not yet retired, you're in the prime of life, you are easily making that kind of money. So listen to me. You will pay 22% for income over that $81,050. So if you make $100,000 a year, you're working, your wife's working, you're both making $50,000 a year, that's $100,000. Difference between $100,000 and $81,050, you're going to pay 22% of that for taxes.
Does the number of kids have any bearing on what you pay?
Well, certainly, but how many people 50 and over have children yet at home, see?
That's true.
So we're dealing here with, mainly we're concerned about the retired people. But these figures are, even those who are not yet retired, those are not 50, those are, if you're 25 or 30 and you're raising little kids, you need to go online and check this stuff out. You need to know.
That's right.
Listen, if you don't manage your money will manage you. And if you don't plan for retirement early, you may not ever get to retire.
That's right.
And there are some people who get old and never retire. They work until finally the state provides for them in a nursing home. That's a fact, because they didn't plan. If you do not plan, you plan to fail.
And so you can't wait till you're 50 to start planning.
No, but if you have, start planning sometime.
Yeah.
The earlier the better. Okay, there's for incomes over $86,375. For married couples filing jointly, $172,750. Some people say, oh, that's a lot of money. Not by today's standards, it isn't. Not when a new pickup truck can cost you $70,000. And there's a lot of them running around. Big, fine, fancy pickup trucks. They're even single women want to drive fancy, big pickup trucks.
There was somebody that had a real fancy pickup, and they were paying $700 a month
In payment,
in payment.
plus a huge amount in insurance.
Yeah.
Okay, $172,750, we'll say $173,000. You divide that in two, you have two wage earners. And see, now we're at a point in our nation where, because of entertainment, because of wanting things, etc., two-person income, or two people in a household with income, has become almost a necessity. And if there are children in the home, you're having to pay for daycare. And of course, if they're in school, there are costs associated with that. And the other day I saw figures about what it costs to send children, if they don't go to public school, what it costs to send them to a parochial school like a Roman Catholic school or Lutheran school or whatever, and what it costs for them to go to a private school or a charter school as opposed to what it costs to go to public school. And one way or the other, kids are not cheap. They cost you some money. So plan, plan, plan. Here you have an income of $172,750. That means two people in the household are working, with what we would call good jobs here in Springburg, USA. Well, that's like $80,000, $85,000 each. Well, by the time they do some withholding on that and retirement benefits or 401k or whatever, you don't take that much home. It costs something to live in the United States of America. You will pay 24% on any income over that. If man and wife together make $200,000, $100,000 apiece, they're going to pay 24% of any amount over $172,750. That's a chunk of change. Now, I recognize there are other deductions and all that kind of thing that can be had. I'm not here to talk to you about deductions. I don't want anybody to misinterpret deductions. If I presented it, somebody might say, well, that's a way to get out of paying taxes. No, I don't ever do that. For us, we don't want to evade taxes, but we want to avoid paying unnecessary taxes. That's for you and your tax preparer, or you and your CPA to figure out, you and your accountant, not for me. I'm just telling you what it is in blank verse. Well, anyway, we can go all the way up to 37% for incomes over $628,300 for married couples. Again, it may not be relevant to you, but it's relevant to a lot of folks. There's a lot of married couples who make that kind of money. I saw here in little old Springburg, USA, in a local business newspaper the other day, the amount of money being so-called earned by heads of corporations in this little city of 159,498 people. A whole lot of people making in excess of $1 million a year in salary and benefits, and much of that is taxable. They pay a heavy tax load. Okay, that's the tax brackets for 2021. Now, the 16th Amendment gave Congress the power to tax the incomes of all individuals and the profits of all businesses. So that's going on today. Right now, the great debate, President Biden wants to raise the corporate rate from 21% to 28%. And remember, during World War II, it was 90%. But this is not World War II, thankfully. But the other party prefers 21%, which is where it's at now, because they believe that corporations stay more productive when they have a lower tax rate, and eventually they end up paying more taxes because they're doing more business. Also, they are concerned that if you raise the tax rate, more companies leave the United States and go to another country to do business. And so another very, very liberal political base has said we can handle that. We want to support a global tax rate so that if a huge American corporation wants to move a bunch of its operations offshore to another country, they will still have to pay a certain amount of tax, corporate tax, so therefore it wouldn't pay them to move. This thing, folks, it trickles down to you, because whatever that cost is of doing business by a major corporation who makes toilet tissue, you're going to end up paying more for toilet tissue in the store. It's that simple. Whatever it is, if it's automobiles, you're going to pay more for a car. And not only, well, you say, I don't buy new cars. Guess what? The used cars become more valuable. You will pay more. If it's a computer, you'll pay more. If it's a stupid smartphone, you'll pay more. If it's a little notebook, you'll pay more. Whatever it is, you will pay more. That's the reason why times have changed from when I was a pastor, and I started out with a salary of $1,600 a year, and then got promoted eventually to $3,200 a year. I thought I'd almost died and almost gone to heaven. You can't make it on $3,200 a year now. So anyway, times change. Money values change. That's enough about income tax for today. We'll deal some more with it another time. I want to, at least in the few minutes we have, let people know we are going to deal with Social Security. Social Security is here. It's here to stay. The history of Social Security is amazing. I suggest, again, people go online and study the history of Social Security. It started in a great year. It started in the month of August, 1935. I was born in June of 1935. I guess President Roosevelt saw the handwriting on the wall and said, oh, this baby boy, Paul Curtis Collins, born up there in north central Missouri, Randolph County, in a 3-room house. When he gets old, he's going to need some security. We'll just start something called Social Security. Anyway, that's when it had its beginnings. But before it really kicked in for a lot of people, in the state of Missouri, they had the old age pension. Mm-hmm. And it was like $15 a month. And the way they funded the old age pension was through a mill tax. That is 1% of 1 cent on every purchase. So in other words, if you spent a dime, you paid 1 mill in tax. Now the mill originally was a little lead thing about the size of a nickel. It was 1 mill. And then when the war came along and metal got more expensive, they went to cardboard. And some people listening to me will remember when a quart of milk had a cardboard stopper in the top, a flat stopper with a little thing you get a hold of and you could pull that out. Mm-hmm. That's the only, you talk about trusting people, that's the only thing that kept your milk that the milkman left on your doorstep safe, was that little piece of cardboard. It was just about this big around. That they used that size and that to make a mill out of cardboard. The war then produced plastic. All of a sudden, plastic was invented out of necessity, and they started making mills out of plastic. They were the size of a nickel. They were plastic. They were embossed, stamped out. The red one was 1 mill. A green one was 5 mills. So if you went in to the store, say you went into a 5 and 10 cent store, and you bought something that cost a dime, the clerk would say that'll be 10 cents and 1 mill.
So is that when the 5 and dime came into being?
No,
Was
5
during
and
that time?
No, 5 and dime was in existence already. But then if you spent 50 cents, they'd say that'll be 50 cents and 5 mills. There was a guy in my hometown of Moberly, Missouri, who was really great at playing. Please don't take offense about this. He loved to play the part of the village idiot. He really wasn't, but he was a showman. And whether it was winter or summer, he wore a long overcoat. It would come down to his ankles, all bundled up, and a winter-type hat on his head with the ear flaps. And he'd stand on the street corner, and he'd take feathers and blow feathers in the air. Anything to draw a crowd. When the crowd got around, he'd open up his coat, and he'd have all kinds of watches. Wristwatches had just come in. Before that, you had pocket watches only. And he'd have watches, and over here were pencils. And he'd sell stuff. And people loved to meet him on the street because it was a show. Guess what? He played the village idiot to the extent that he started letting people know, and he would mumble his words like he had trouble talking, that he needed some mills. And people started giving him all of their mills. He ended up with buckets and buckets and buckets of mills, red ones and green ones, because everybody saved their mills, so when they would see Johnny downtown, not Johnny Rooster, but Johnny, they would give Johnny all their mills, and then he'd put on a little show for them. Now this is enough to, as we used to say,
Carol up the governor.
this would be enough to gag a maggot. But he would actually pull out a can of fishing worms and eat a live fishing worm. If you had enough mills, you'd see him eat a live fishing worm. what a guy. He was sort of sponsored by a man who owned a big hotel there in town, big for those days, and that guy was from Italy, and he had to kind of be overly friendly because of World War II. We fought the Italians for a while, but he knew how to make friends in his adopted country. He put a popcorn machine like they would have in a movie theater, put it out on the sidewalk, and would pop popcorn, and he had Johnny. There's the guy that would dip the popcorn, hand it out to people, and do a little entertainment. It didn't cost much to entertain us in those days. But anyway,
So you're making the best of a bad time.
that's right, and we did. And
How did people retire on mills?
how many what?
How did people retire on mills?
Oh, okay. The mills, they always said when we went in the store, that'll be 10 cents and 1 mill because we got to collect the tax for the old folks. The mill was used to finance the Missouri State Old Age Pension Fund. Isn't that amazing? And
That's no longer,
no longer, no. Social Security kicked in,
Yeah.
but we had a whole generation of people 65 and older. But now remember, there weren't all that many because people didn't live that long. Back when I was a kid, if somebody got to be 65, they were ancient. But they worked. Most people worked until they were dead, or they worked until they were unable to work. We had an old couple live next door to us that they took in laundry. He had an old low silhouette panel truck, and he'd go out, make his round, and pick up the laundry from people, take it to their house. They had a wash house behind their house, and they washed clothes in old washing machines with a wringer on them.
a ringer.
And
yeah.
she would hang the clothes out and dry them, and then she would iron them in the house, and he'd carry them out and hang them in his panel truck. And then, and this was a low silhouette panel. It was more like today's SUVs, only be a big one. And he'd go and take those clothes back. That's how they made their living. And they would come in the evening, come over and sit down on the front porch because people didn't have air conditioning. They sat on the front porch and talked. And they would talk about, well, today I spent some money, but I spent some mills, and so I'm helping the old folks. And he'd sit there, and his first name was Napoleon. He wasn't Napoleon Bonaparte from France, but his first name was Napoleon, and we called him Pole. And he'd sit there, and his wife's name was Rosie, and he'd spin these yarns, tall tales. And he'd look over at Rosie and say, ain't that right, Rosie? She'd look at him and she'd say, that's right, Pole. And then he'd go on, ain't that right, Rosie? That's right, Pole. And he entertained us. We loved it. We're getting close to our quitting time. How much time we have? 2 minutes? Minute and a half. Well, next time, like I say, this is not an entertainment hour. It's an information hour, but I hope you've been entertained a little bit with some of the short tales from old times. We will really get into Social Security, why it came about, how it came about, who can get it, how to get it. We will tell you about Medicare, about some of the things that you get through Medicare automatically and other things you don't get automatically. We'll even tell you about what Medicare will do in terms of chiropractic. Most people think about Medicare only in terms of the MDs and DOs. Well, Medicare is even relevant to chiropractors in certain ways. Now, we'll also tell you the difference between Medicare Complete. There'll be Medicare Part A, Medicare Part B, and then Medicare Complete. And then there's Medicare Supplement. Look out. Look out. That one will cost you some money. Anyway, Medicare Made Easy, Social Security, the history of it, and what you can expect, and what kind of money you can expect to get. And I'm going to recommend, don't try retiring on Social Security alone, because inflation will not allow it. Well, we've had a good time here, and we're wrapping up. We look forward to you seeing us next week. If you want to, tell other people about this, Axe Media Group. It'll be archived. They can find this show. And make it a point to watch them regularly, the whole series, and you'll learn about income tax, Social Security, retirement, and travel, hobbies, all kinds of things. Until next time, Nancy and Paul, we say to you, stay blessed.
I know that's right.